All right, let's get started with section 6. Here's your focus question. If the New Deal did not end second class citizenship for blacks, the 1930s saw the inclusion of other groups into mainstream American life. With Catholics and Jews in prominent posts in Roosevelt's administration and new immigrant voters forming a base of the Democratic Party, the New Deal made ethnic pluralism central to American politics. The election of Fiorello LaGuardia, an Italian American, as New York's mayor in 1933 represented the growing power of ethnic working class voters. These ethnic groups experienced growing cultural assimilation as immigration from Europe virtually halted and movies, chain stores, and mass advertising penetrated immigrant enclaves. Unlike the coercive Americanization of the past, however, this Americanization incorporated ethnic identity and married it to American political ideals. In the mid 1930s, for the first time in U.S. history, the left, including socialists, communists, labor radicals, and many New Deal liberals, strongly influenced American politics and culture. The CIO and the Communist Party in particular became the center of a social and intellectual impulse that helped reshape the boundaries of American freedom. The Communist Party grew from a very small and isolated group into a mass organization. Although it never had more than 100,000 members at any one time in the 1930s, several times that number passed through its ranks. The communist dedication to socialism appealed to a widespread belief that the Depression showed capitalism had failed. But more important was the party's constant activity on behalf of the unemployed, workers, and unions, and civil rights for African Americans. At the height of the Popular Front, when the communists sought to ally themselves with socialist and New Deal liberals in movements for reform rather than revolution, the Communist Party was considered respectable. Ironically, even though it was tied to Stalinist Russia, the Communist Party contributed to the expansion of freedom via New Deal liberalism and its pluralist conception of America. The Popular Front vision of American society greatly influenced American culture through theater, film, and dance. Its broadly left wing ethos defined social and economic radicalism and not support for status quo as true Americanism. Ethnic and racial diversity, unionism, and social citizenship were what made America great, not the pursuit of wealth. The American people, who were seen by many intellectuals in the 1920s as fundamentalist and crassly commercial, were now proclaimed embodiments of democratic virtue. Artists and writers in the 1930s crafted socially meaningful work that depicted daily life for ordinary farmers and urban workers, and artworks about migrant workers and sharecroppers and those that were created by the people, such as folk music and black spirituals, were held to express genuine Americanism. The Democratic Party, despite its new northern black and ethnic base of support, did not embrace ethnocultural issues. But the Popular Front insisted that the nation's greatness lay in its diversity, tolerance, and rejection of ethnic prejudice and class privilege. The CIO promoted and often embodied this idea of ethnic and racial inclusivity. It adopted cultural pluralism and welcomed groups previously excluded from the labor movement, such as blacks and Mexican Americans. Yet while the Popular Front culture celebrated the promise of America, it did not ignore its tragedies and troubles, such as racial discrimination. This idea is best encapsulated in Martha Graham's 1938 modern dance masterpiece, American Document. Popular Front culture strongly condemned racism as incompatible with Americanism compared to New Deal liberalism's tepid stance on issues of race and civil rights. While Jewish and Catholic groups promoted ethnic and religious tolerance, the Communist Party was the only mostly white organization of the era to prioritize combating racism. The Communists even found support in the conservative South. Communist groups mobilized popular support for black defendants victimized by a racial criminal justice system, a racist criminal justice system, which made the Scottsboro case an international cause. 9 young black men in Scottsboro, Alabama, were arrested in 1931 for raping 2 white women. Although one of the 2 accusers recanted, the men were put on trial and convicted 3 times. The Supreme Court rejected the first 2 verdicts and created legal principles that greatly expanded civil liberties, that defendants have a constitutional right to effective legal representation, and that blacks cannot be systematically excluded from juries. But the court approved the 3rd conviction, and 5 of the men went to prison for more than a decade. White workers' resistance did not keep the CIO from welcoming black members and supporting anti-lynching laws and voting rights for Southern blacks. For the first time, the CIO brought large number of blacks into the labor movement, even after exclusion had made them hostile to unions for many years. Popular Front culture also supported civil liberties, especially the right of workers to organize unions. Pro-union workers faced local laws restricting free speech and repression by private and public police. Public concern about violence directed at Southern tenant farmers and Northern industrial workers made discussions of um, labor rights discussions over civil liberties. In 1936, a Senate committee led by Robert La Follette exposed the harsh methods employers used to fight unionization, including spies and private police. Critics argued that America's workplaces resembled European dictatorships. Workers' militancy also showcased that the free speech of groups and not just individuals could also be violated, and the federal government responded by emphasizing the importance of civil liberties. The Supreme Court abandoned liberty of contract for a definition of American freedom based on civil liberties and allowed free speech for communists, labor picketing, and initiated the repeal of numerous state laws that inhibited expression. Yet other groups also tried to restrict free speech. In 1938, the U.S. House of Representatives created an Un American Activities Committee to ferret out disloyalty and un American behavior in speech. And 2 years later, Congress passed the Smith Act, which made it a crime to teach, advocate, or encourage the overthrow of government. Similar committees were established at the state level and used to intimidate communists and others on the left. By the 1940s, the New Deal was ending. Growing numbers of Southern Democrats opposed Roosevelt's policies. Roosevelt exposed the poverty and lack of economic development in the South, and a new generation of homegrown Southern radicals, Southern New Dealers, black activists, labor leaders, communists, and a few elected officials, began organizing for unions, unemployment relief, and racial justice. Instead of simply shaping New Deal measures to accommodate their racial and economic preferences, Southern Democrats, who feared that federal intervention in the region would lead to more unions and racial conflict, started to oppose Roosevelt's proposals altogether. In response, in 1938, FDR appealed to Southern voters to support more progressive, pro-New Deal Southern Democratic candidates in the congressional elections. Instead, however, the South's small electorate resisted and re-elected the incumbents. In the North, court packing and the rise of the CIO led middle-class voters to go towards the Republicans. The Republicans gained a significant number of seats, and a stalemate in Congress followed. Congress started to eliminate many popular New Deal programs, and Roosevelt turned his administration's attention toward Europe and impending war. The New Deal seems limited, given the enormous catastrophe it confronted. Compared to European welfare states, Social Security was confined to fewer functions and not as well funded. The New Deal had not improved race or gender relations, and it actually worsened them in many ways. But nonetheless, it accomplished many things, most importantly, making the federal government an active force in regulating and shaping economic life. It also restored Americans' faith in democracy, reconfigured American party and electoral politics, and reinvigorated ideas of freedom to include a more diverse American people. However, even the New Deal could not undo the Depression, which was finally ended only by the mass employment created by World War II. And that is the end of section 6. We'll be back for the next chapter.